Hi, I'm Gary Striegler. This slideshow features one of my favorite projects, a panel niche that I got to build for one of my clients. It kind of looks like a complicated project until you break it down to pieces. It's actually a back panel that has a radius top, a curved top panel jamb, and then two side jambs, plus the curved trim, the casing trim is pretty straightforward. Hopefully once you've seen this slideshow, you'll realize it's really not that complicated project. You just have to break it down into simple pieces. I found that strip laminating is the simplest way for me to create a curved trim project. I start out by ripping pieces out of a thicker piece of lumber and then planing them down to thin strips I can bend around to form. Next, I used a glue roller to spread an ample supply of glue in between the laminating strips. I just use a tight bond glue and it's always worked well for me. Here's the way that I do my laminating glue ups. I've made some special L brackets by cutting angle iron, 6x6 angle iron, and then I just draw the line that I want, screw those angle iron pieces to that line. Then my wood laminating strips are sandwiched between two 1/8" pieces of thin metal. I use a clamp that has a deep throat so that I can clamp right in the very middle of my L brackets. Now, because I need to spread that clamping pressure evenly up and down the whole glue up, I put an additional L bracket on the back that helps spread out that clamping pressure. I have some special clamps I use that I can tighten with an impact driver, but any type of heavy duty C-clamp with a deep throat will work. I know that I've got the right amount of clamping pressure when I see glue starting to pop up from between the joints of my laminating layer. We call that squeeze out. And as long as I'm seeing some squeeze out, I know that I'm going to end up with a really good joint. Now the glue up was made at least a 1/2 inch wider than the finished pieces that I needed, so I've got room to clean up on both edges by carefully running it through the table saw. Once I've made my curved top components, I wanted to go to work building the actual curved back panel. So I took one of the curved rail pieces that I glued up for the top, laid it on a piece of plywood, and then scribed a line inside of it. That line is equal to the amount of curved rail that's going to be showing on the back panel and the piece of panel mold that fits inside it. Once I'd scribed the line that I needed, I screwed L brackets down about on 6-inch centers through the plywood into my bench worktop. This glue up for the curved back rail and the panel mold is a different type of glue up than the tall, thin glue up that I made for those curved top rails. It's going to be a lot more layers, but the pieces won't be nearly as tall, about 1 1/4 to 1 3/8. So I use a different type of form. Here I've taken some 2x2s and screwed them down to the bench. That is going to elevate my glue up 1.5 inches up off, and that gives me room for my knuckles when I'm turning the clamps. And it also means that all those glue up strips only have 1.5 inches to stick to. If I put them right down on top of the bench top, the whole glue up would probably get stuck to the bench top. Now, here's a tip. You can also use wax or pledge or something to spray on those 2x2s, and that'll help keep things from sticking. Then once the glue up is done, there'll be a piece of metal also on the outside of it, but these pieces of metal are much shorter. They're probably 3.5 inches, whereas the other piece of flat metal were like 6 inches tall. The process of making the laminate strips is pretty much the same as making the laminate strips for that tall, thin glue up. It's just a lot more strips, and I've ripped them to about 1/4 inch thick, and I don't need to plane them quite as thin. These probably were just about 3/16, maybe 3/16 strong, and I end up probably with 14 or 15 of the strips need to be glued together. I do this wide, shorter glue up using K-body clamps. Now I left a dry layer after about the first 6 layers with no glue in it. That's because those first 6 pieces are going to make my curved panel mold. All the rest of the pieces make the curved rail that's the top rail of that back panel detail. Again, after about 2 hours, I'll pull this glue up loose and probably try and scrape at least a little bit of the glue off of it with the scraper. Then I'm going to run it through my Woodmaster planer to try and get a flat glue up and get rid of all the excess glue that I couldn't scrape off. The only curved component of this project that wasn't strip laminated was the header piece of the curved casing. It was made out of an MDF product called TruePan. I cut the radius using a router on a trammel and then ran it through my Woodmaster to put the profile on it. Here I've removed the top of the machine to show the setup that's used to run the curved panel mold and the straight panel mold. Those are the pieces for the top panel section of the back panel. You can see the profile of the molding knife, and here I've got a straight piece of wood running through, but the curved piece would follow the curved guide on the inside. The straight piece just guides against the straight edge. So with one setup, I'm able to make both straight and curved pieces of molding. I put the lid back on and went ahead and ran both the curved pieces of the panel mold and the straight pieces. I wanted to go ahead and finish making all my curved components, so I set up to make the curved panel mold that would fit in that top curved panel. Now, because that molding is running in a different plane, the panel mold for the back frame panel lays flat, but this piece is curved vertically, so I had to use a different type of cutter. I have a special router bit made, and the profile of that router bit matches the profile of the molding that I'm running. Now, it's almost impossible to have a router sit on top of a tall, thin glue up and not distort the cut. I actually overcome this by adding a block of wood to the base of my router. It's kind of like putting training wheels on the router. It makes it impossible for the router to pivot and ruin the piece. That's what lets me run a really accurate curved piece of trim with a simple tool like a router. I use a clamp on each end of the glue up to make sure that it doesn't move while I'm doing my routing process. Now, it's really important anytime that you're doing any type of curved trim to make sure that you have 5 or 6 inches at least more than you actually need. That gives you a place to start and stop your machining processes like I'm doing with this router bit, and also to clamp it.